What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is marriage and family therapist, Stephen Ng. Stephen, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Michael. I got into this field of counseling kind of the hardest possible way I could imagine. My family of origin was truly a sterling example of the dysfunctional family. My mom was an alcoholic. My father was a career criminal who was shot to death by the police. And coming out of a family like that, in the back of my mind at least, there was always this, God, I wonder what it's like to be in a normal family. So because of the options available to me in the life in which I grew up, I ended up turning to religion, and then specifically to fundamentalist Christianity, which was so great in some ways because it gave me black and white answers to every life problem, no shades of gray whatsoever. And so there was an answer for every possible concern. And that dovetailed very nicely with the control freak that I had developed into by that time. This is in my teens. And that stayed with me. I rode that pony all the way through my 20s into my early 30s. And then a friend who was an alcoholic in recovery took me aside and invited me to go with him to an AA meeting, and then to an adult children of alcoholics meeting and an Al-Anon meeting and so forth. And I ended up coming out of a lot of denial about the nature of my family, because even after all the very clear evidence, I just never really considered my mom to be an alcoholic, because she was highly functional. She always had a job. We always had food. And then as time went by, religion became less and less helpful to me because it seemed to offer fewer and fewer realistic human answers. And then I started therapy after all that self-help group experience with Al-Anon. And it was altogether a tremendous journey, and one I'm really glad I undertook, and it really changed me. So coming out of that, though, I do remember, coming out of that youth, I do remember my disdain for all things psychology related, partly because of the religious resentment against psychology, but also because, I'm a typical male, and I just thought that's just a sign of weakness. If you can't figure your shit out, you need to, take a minute and have a good think.
Yeah.
And I was rather surprised by how much help is out there. And having gotten a lot of help, I decided, hey, this is pretty cool. I want to be a part of this. And that's how I got into it.
Interesting. So of course, like most folks, I found you on psychologytoday.com. You know, your blog was sort of centered around, if I remember correctly, finding a new partner, or why people do that. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on a little bit. I mean, we're going to get into some other things, I think. But the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about is why do, and I think maybe the question centers around men specifically, but it's probably harder to answer that. But why is it that men focus on, as soon as they lose a relationship, their focus is automatically on, I got to find somebody else, like immediately. And by the way, guilty as charged right here for sure, for like 100%. So, but why is that? Why do we do that? And maybe if you can narrow it down to men specifically.
Well, Michael, I'm hoping you're not going to be in my mind for the rest of this podcast, because I too have a spectacularly failed first marriage. And I really, and how could I not have, coming from my family and getting into it when I was so young? I was 20 at the time, stayed for 18 years. And it was excruciatingly painful, but I was very stubborn. And the reason I got in so early, stayed so long, and then tried to replace her so quickly was because of my own profound emotional neediness. So I never really resolved a number of very vital existential questions that I think all men and all women need to answer. And they kind of boil down to one thing. Before I can have a life that is truly worth sharing, I have to develop a life worth living. And I've been asked, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean a life that is so fun, so rewarding, so satisfying on every level that the most any future partner could hope for is that she might be a wonderful part of an otherwise wonderful life. And that if in a moment of fleeting sanity, she decides to dump me and trade up, for the Filipino pool boy or whoever it is, that I'm not handed my piece of crap life back to me. Instead, I get my life worth living handed back to me and I go forward with my life. And so it's not, it may be hurtful and it may be disappointing to see a future romance go down the tubes, but it is not devastating. It's not that barren landscape where all the trees have fallen down. There's not a blade of grass living on the plain. The air is still because of all the birds have died. It's not going to be like that.
Right.
So that first step of developing a life worth living, that's a question every man has to answer for himself. And I think there was a writer, much better writer than myself, who long ago asked the question. Well, he said that American men have two questions they have to answer in order to be happy. The first is, where am I going? The second is, who am I going with? And he said the problem with American men is they answer those two questions in exactly the opposite order. And I think, his way of phrasing it, my way of phrasing it, kind of hit on something that nobody ever taught us. My own mother didn't teach me, schools didn't teach me, church certainly didn't teach me how to develop a life worth living. What's the checklist? What rubric do I use to evaluate my current life? And I would say, yeah, for every guy listening to this right now, I would say probably just reflecting on, are you happy in your life? Are you interested in what it is you're doing? Do you feel passionate about the causes that you've surrounded yourself with? And do you look forward to each day unfolding? Because if the answers to those questions are no, 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 well, you probably don't have a life worth living.
And so then another person isn't going to change that, or at least in the long term.
Well, it is going to be temporarily satisfying, as you alluded to, but there's another bigger problem, I think, and I think most men listening to this will recognize this as a painfully true observation. The only kind of woman who would want my life not want the only kind of woman who would want to share my life that's not worth living is really the kind of woman I really would be better off without. So even if I do get a girlfriend, it's highly improbable that she would be the right girlfriend. Because if I ever did develop a life worth living, I would find a whole different group of women auditioning for a leading role in my life.
I mean, that's so
I don't,
profound. You know, I
that makes
wonder.
sense.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
Okay.
I can hear. I can remember. Is I I don't try to shut it out necessarily. The first sort of months or so of my situation. When she left. I'm getting distance from it. It's been 5 years, but I can still remember some things. And I can certainly remember the feeling of loneliness and rejection and devastation and all those kinds of things. And I can remember for sure my standards went lower, and I took any crumb I could get from any type of woman at all. And
Yes.
and I understand. So I understand the reasoning, right? I totally understand the reasoning, but it is true that if if that's what I sort of in that mindset, right? My life was not worth living. I was a mess. I mean, I was a mess, lack of a better description. And so if that's the case, then the things that I attracted probably weren't going to make my life better. I mean, people can't make your life better in any way, right? I mean, not over the long term. I think, or at least they can't affect the foundation. They can't
Well, let
affect.
me, if I could put it in perspective, I think you and I are also, we've had such parallel experiences, and I don't think it's just you and me, but I think it's millions of men
Yes.
across this country who've gone through this, and they all really need to comprehend this sort of what I would call relationship technology. Starts with reasoning, but it's also applied science. And you and I think I'll take the liberty of including you, but I know for me, I worked so hard on making my marriage work that I neglected friendships. I
Mm,
neglected developing my own life. I even neglected my own family relationships with my
yeah.
mom and others. And I noticed that I mean, to me, that's part of that life worth living, right? And as soon as the marriage was over, along with all the hurt and devastation you were talking about,
Sure.
there was also this renewed interest in and enthusiasm for developing these other relationships. And the challenge then, I think, for men is to engage in an intentional critical incident debriefing, where I look at what in the heck was going on in my head that I was attracted to her, that I sought a woman like her out, that I picked her, and that I chose every single day of our long marriage to be with her.
So, I mean, what does it say about someone? Like, if you're that guy and you're like focused on dating right away, what does it say about you that maybe is a clue to you, or something of that nature? Like, what is it? Does it say? You talked about doing this sort of like a post op. I'm definitely not capturing what your phrase, but essentially like
A
post mortem.
critical incident debriefing.
There you go. Um,
Yeah.
what? So does that mean? Does that say clear? What? We should probably talk about what that is. But like, does that say that you need to? What does it say about someone if that's what they're focused on?
If they're focused on getting together with another person as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
immediately.
Well, now you have me wondering if you're some kind of masochist, Michael, because it doesn't say anything good.
Yeah.
It really just says, and I've been that guy. It just says I'm too needy. It says I really haven't developed a satisfying life
Yeah.
that I can enjoy where I'm so empty inside that I need another person so I don't have to live with this unbearable emptiness.
Yeah, so it's clearly, I love the emotional needy. I think is what you said initially, and I think that's emotionally needy is so very accurate. Um, God, I mean, that's probably a whole episode in itself. Like, what do you do about that? But let's jump to your thing that I already forgot what you called. Um,
Well, let me remind you. Every time the police shoot somebody, they stop and they sit down and
makes
have a good
sense.
think.
Yeah,
They go over the critical incident, what happened, what went wrong, and they do the same thing when one of their own gets shot.
yeah,
The same thing happens when there's a terrible fire. Like what went wrong, how did we handle it, and the firemen debrief after the experience. The State Department does the same thing. Everybody should do something like this because there are reasons why we do what we do, including our bad decision making. And the question isn't so much of a why question, but how? How did I ever get so messed up in my thinking that I thought so and so was the right person, or that I stayed with them even though, for example, this is something I hear from hundreds of my clients, even though we hadn't had sex in 10 years.
mm,
The record, by the way, is something like 28 years. The couple hadn't had sex in 28 years. And he's still feeling like he's obligated to remain loyal to the relationship. And,
Jesus.
there's so many, in hindsight, so many obvious things. And I do think, I know how we got here. And I think that's maybe more pertinent to your query. And how we got here is you look at the people who gave us all of our training in relationships.
Mm,
It was our parents,
yeah,
our schools, and it was our churches, perhaps even the military for those who went through that experience. But all in all, I would say we're 0 and 4 in
Yeah.
terms in terms of losses and wins, because none of those groups know what they're doing, because they too are taken from the general population. And the reasoning has something to do with history. We are failing more than any other group of people in the history of the world. But there's a reason for that. And the reason is, as our civilization has advanced, we no longer need a partner to get out in front of the plow and pull the plow while I'm pushing the furrow and, the blade into the furrow. We no longer need somebody to do the washing and the cleaning and the cooking while we're out doing whatever it is we're doing to bring home some money. We
Right.
no longer need somebody to do any of those things for us. So why do we even get married? Oh yeah, because we are human and we want companionship and we want love and we want sex. And sex, of course, is a big part of it for a lot of us. So to get all of that in a meaningful relationship, marriage, or whatever people like to call it, apart from a legal entanglement,
Right.
partnering up with someone is something the human race has done ever since the beginning of our race. And our species has always been inclined to form strategic alliances with another human being so that we might face life's challenges together. The challenges, though, have got increasingly complex, and that one of the most complex challenges, I think, is how can a man and a woman, mostly, how can a man and a woman share the same home and both be happy and fulfilled?
Well, I
Because,
mean, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? I think in terms of
yeah.
going forward, and certainly it's a big question. I mean, the divorce numbers, I'm a bit my perception is a bit skewed, just because I run a support group on Facebook, and especially lately, the influx of men, it's just for men, and the influx of men has been crazy. But it's so anecdotal that I don't know if it's actually divorce numbers are increasing. I haven't looked at that data, but it feels that way. It seems that way. So it's a valid question. But I do want to go back a little bit to your analysis that you do. You sit down and you think about what went wrong. How much do you bring in other outside views to get to sort of help with that, to what did do you ask your friends, or are they too biased? Do you get a therapist to help you kind of navigate that? Because I know in the beginning it can go a lot of ways. You can be very angry and she was always wrong, it was all her fault, or you can go the other way, where it was like, I'm a piece of shit, it was all my fault. And so how do you
Right.
navigate sort of taking in the proper information to make that assessment?
Well, I get asked this question, believe it or not, pretty often. And I even had a woman who's part of a couple right now. She recently asked me to just download all the educational information that she needed so she could make this thing work.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's not just a cognitive download. There's also a vast personal history that we have to take into account. So uh, who do I who do I let in to help me? I think, to answer that with another mysterious saying, there's an old Buddhist saying that when the student is ready, the master appears. And I think the first step is opening my mind to the possibility that I might have made a mistake or two.
Right. Yeah.
So if I've made a mistake or two, if I can be humble enough to own that, humble enough to recognize that I've never tried harder at anything than making my marriage work and never failed more spectacularly at anything, well, okay, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see if there's anyone out there who does. And I think there's a lot of this is just going to be introspection, just sitting with oneself. But I also think it's very clear we humans make one another smarter by having conversations with her. All the science is in on that. And the guy who is isolated and alone is not typically going to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, of course I need friends.
Yeah.
but also the women I date, maybe some of the wonderful people in my family, if I'm that lucky. Uh, Lord knows if a therapist comes along, but as you know, not all professionals are created equal.
True.
So some attorneys are better than others, some doctors are better than others, and some therapists just don't know what they're talking about. So I'm sorry to say that. I mean, that's
No,
my
I
own.
I agree. It's interesting. It's refreshing. I mean, I've heard it from other therapists too, but it's always refreshing to me to hear a therapist say, "Yeah, we're not all very good at what we do. Not all of us. That's not even possible."
Yeah, and so I want to say to the guys listening to this, it's okay to interview therapists to see if
Yeah.
you can get a better sense of it. And then when you're sitting in a session, to look at them and say, "Yeah, that's not going to work for me." And
Yeah.
then maybe to reconsider whether you need to fire them, but to not give up. You know, I had a terrible doctor once when I was a teenager, and his ill treatment of my condition put me in the hospital, almost killed me. But I didn't give up on medicine or on
Right.
doctors,
Right.
you
Right.
know, and so you have to keep looking for those people
Yeah.
who are more knowledgeable than us. You know, you would consider, and I think everybody would agree, mate selection, which is what we're talking about in the big picture.
Yeah.
Mate selection is actually part of our sexuality, right? And we all had sex education, and we are a social species, but why are we so flippin' bad at this? You know, because we are, and our
Yeah.
failure rate is still roughly 50%
Yeah.
for first marriages. Second marriages, it's 10% higher, 60% of those fail, and so on up the ladder.
Yeah.
But the reason it's gone down slightly in recent years is because millions of Americans have given up on marriage. It's not because, oh, we're starting to get the hang of it.
Right.
No, it's we're even worse at it than we were, say, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So the people who are really making a go of it tend to be in the upper class, very loaded with money. They
Mm.
tend to be white, and they know that if they stay together, they will accumulate wealth. And they also have the money to afford all of the wonderful, bright, shiny distractions that help them to bear up with their horrible marriage.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, money solves a lot of problems, right?
Yeah, right.
Let's do a little recap. So, if you are sort of focused on dating right away, it's a clue that maybe you have a bit of an emotional neediness that you need to take a look at. And to do that, therapy is probably your best bet. And I would guess that also what you'd want to look at is your childhood, your upbringing, right? Doesn't it all kind of start there? Isn't that sort of the next step?
Well, it has to be, and there's so many reasons for that, but that would be another whole conversation.
Oh yeah.
You know, one of the real easy hacks, relatively easy hacks, though, I would say to all the guys listening to this would be get yourself some real friends. You know, brother, just start surrounding yourself with a manageable number of men you admire, men you can look up to. They can be younger, they can be older, they can be in different professions. They probably should be in different occupations, just so you have some diversity.
Sure.
But if you can't make good friendships work, and that's you know, with the absence of any challenges romantically or sexually, right? These are platonic relationships with men. If you can't make any of those work, you have no business dating anybody. So
Yeah, I can't argue
get
that.
get
Yeah.
thyself some friends, buddy. I mean, that's so critical to this mission
Yeah.
because they will. You know how men are. They have no problem at all seeing that we're hurting, and they can be very loving and sympathetic, but also poke at us and, oh, does that hurt? Does that
Yeah.
hurt?
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't date drunks anymore, stupid.
Well, on that note, let's say you've done some work and you're starting to feel fairly good about where you're at. How do you know? And maybe this isn't a fair question because I'm sure it's different answer ish for everyone. But how do you know if you're ready to start looking and put your toe back in the pee filled dating pool as
Yeah.
as I have discovered?
Well, I that's a really gosh, that's such a great question. How do you know when you're ready? And I think intuitively, I will just say this. If every man who gets a divorce allows himself a handful of years, say 1 year for every 7 years of marriage, a handful of years to just date and observe who you're dating, who you're picking out, and ask yourself, is this the same woman as my ex? I mean, with a different face, a different mask, but
Right.
is it the same woman? Because if you're picking the same kinds of women, obviously you're not ready to really be settling down. But dating recreationally tells you so much about your mindset, about where, you get to question where you're meeting potential mates. What kind of a life are you really living? What if all the women on the earth decided to never marry you? In faced with that problem, could you ever figure out how to have a great life? I think I could. I think sunsets are still beautiful. There's a lot of music in this world, a lot of
Mm.
great books. I love my dogs. I love my family. So I have a lot of options out there. I love my career for that matter. So
Mm.
I think for people who are uh, still feeling that kind of needy desperation, I think it's time to just go slow. I think guys are we have an incredible capacity to bullshit others and to swallow some of our own bullshit in the process. We often think we're ready when we're not. And as long as the listeners are careful to avoid commitment, they will get their hearts stomped on, but it will not be devastating,
Yeah.
so that they can draw back and say, okay, I went a little too far. I got a little overcommitted, a little ahead of
Mm.
my skis. And now I just need to slow down. I surveyed all of my clients. I have a lot of male clients, and I surveyed all of them for number one, what defect of character did your last partner in your last committed relationship have? And they had no problem identifying that defect.
Sure.
And I said, how long did it take you between the time you fell in love and the time you committed? And the average was less than 3 months.
Mm.
Less than less than 12 weeks? Are you
Wow.
kidding me? Are you effing kidding me? That is not long enough. And I asked them, how long would it have taken you to figure out that she had this deal-breaking personality trait? How long would you have needed to simply date her? And the average answer was 1 year.
Fair answer. So there's definitely something not aligned there, right?
Right. So
Just a little.
yeah, it's really easy, I think, for people then to, okay, I need more than 3 months, probably at least a year.
Yeah.
But then I ask them, if you're happy dating her and you're happy committing gradually, is there any rush to close that sale? I mean, really, what is the rush?
Yeah.
To put a ring on it, to
Right.
get married, to move her in? There's no rush.
Yeah.
If it's great, just let it be great and savor the experience of dating someone you're having a great relationship with.
Yeah.
And to be talking about that, and understanding that commitment is not an all or nothing binary.
Mm.
Commitment is on this vast continuum of little by little by little. For example, I dated a woman who I found out later into the relationship was still being stalked by her ex.
Mm.
And normally, the script calls for the new boyfriend to be the knight in shining armor
Right.
and kind of like march into Dodge City and throw the bum out.
Right.
But I was really committed already in my debriefing. I had recognized my marriage was it was less of a partnership and more of an adoption.
Mm.
And I really didn't want to be in that sort of power imbalance anymore. I really wanted somebody who could have my back. And that meant to me that I needed a functional adult.
Yeah.
And women in bars demonstrate daily across this country. They know how to get rid of men. And I challenged her with that. And I said, there is a legal path to getting rid of this bum.
Hmm.
And if you're committed to getting to know other men, including me, you got to be equally committed to getting rid of him, because
Mm.
he's been crazy abusive. And so when she said, well, what should I do? And I gave her like 10 different things to do. I don't know if I can do any of those. Yeah, I'm gonna take a break from our
Yeah.
relationship. Call me, when you figure this out.
Well, again, but
And
that speaks to your non-emotional neediness, right? Because you're like, this is a thing I can't deal with. So let me
right,
stand up for myself, set some boundaries, whatever you want to call it, and be like, I'd rather be alone. I mean, that to me is kind of the goal, is being okay with being alone. I mean, that's kudos to you, my friend. I see many men that aren't, and I probably had it for sure, early in my my relationship before marriage, for sure. I probably had things that I overlooked because I was emotionally needy, um, and so uh, it if I would have, boy, I say this all the time, if I would have known now, what I
if
if
I
I
had
would have
known
known then,
then what
yeah,
I know
yeah,
now,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. It'd be a whole different life. But I want to talk about, we started talking about this a little bit before we started rolling, and this is probably one of the last things we cover is in terms of um, men reaching out for help. Why? I think it's obviously an issue. Suicide rates sort of bear this out. Um,
absolutely.
why do men have such an issue with reaching out, putting their hand up and saying, I need some help, especially around emotional issues?
Yeah, and I know there are countless jokes among women about men who can't ask for direction.
Right.
Right? Can't pull the car over and ask somebody where this address is or where that street is.
Right.
And my response in those conversations is to point out that men are going to start asking for help with directions when women start dating lost men. Because women are not attracted to the guy who has no idea and lets it be known that he has no idea what the what.
Oh,
So,
that's pretty fucking brilliant. I never thought of that.
so when we men we establish our pecking order amongst one another by our competency, we establish our value. It's an irrational belief to consider that competency is equivalent to my masculinity or that there's a one-to-one correspondence. Because I can have no idea how to repair my car, for example, and still be a great man, a great father, a great husband. There are so many circumstances in which we need help. Tax time, we need CPAs, legal issues, we need a lawyer, and the list goes on and on. I never do my own dental hygienic checks. I always go to the dentist. So I think with us men to admit and accept the idea that our masculinity is not threatened by those three scary words, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay to say I don't know, or even to emphasize that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing in this circumstance or this situation. I have no idea how to fix this. And I hope you can tell from the way I've been talking, I'm a big fan of Benjamin Franklin,
Mm.
America's first and favorite scientist. And his admonition that an ounce of prevention was worth a pound of cure, I think applies to all of our relationships.
Mm.
So prophylactically, I would say going to a therapist is a whole lot cheaper than going to a divorce attorney.
Oh, amen to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
going to the therapist, and you may not know what to say, and here would be a good thing to start with. I had a really awful divorce and an even more awful marriage. I don't ever want to repeat anything like that again. Can you help me?
Mm. Yeah.
And if the therapist says, no, I think I'll have to refer you, then go with the referral because you're
Yeah.
in the wrong office. And then ask the same question over and over until you find somebody who says, yeah, I think I can.
Well, I mean, that's kind of basically what my last question is to everybody is what words of wisdom would you impart to a man who is just beginning his divorce journey?
Oh, well, first of all, my heart goes out to every man in that position because it's just devastating. I think most of us men are so isolated, so alone that when she leaves us, she leaves with all of the love that was in our life, all of the companionship, all of the significant relationships. And it isn't just the loss of a partner, it's the loss typically of home, of family, and of an entire way of life. I mean, there are so many losses, but the most devastating loss of all, I would say, would be in my efforts to please her and to make the marriage work. I typically lost myself.
Mm.
And that is the worst, most horrific loss of all. And that's the one I need to repair. And that one is within my control. I can go to a therapist. I can explain. I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know where I am, what I'm doing. And I need some help with this. And our friends, of course, if you didn't lose all your friends like I did in the custody fight, I mean, she got all of in the property settlement, I should say, she got all of my friends because my friends were the husbands of her friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up with nothing and had to start over from scratch. And I would say, along with looking for the greatest therapist you could find, please also look for those great men who are going to be your future friends. They're just as hard to figure out and to find as female partners or girlfriends and wives. Finding great guys is challenging,
Yeah.
but I think it's so worth it because they will be with you the rest of your life.
Amen. Stephen, what's the best way to people to find you, to reach you, to get in touch to do if they want to maybe work with you or read anything you wrote? How do they do that?
Well, my website is stevening.com, and that's Stephen with a V. Going on to Psychology Today makes it super easy, I think, to write me an email through Psychology Today. But my actual email, I'm going to give my actual email over your podcast, and I never do that. Stephen with a V at stevening.com.
Gotcha.
And if any guy in that, I mean, I can't do counseling online
Yeah.
because there's just, as you know from your experience, Michael, there's just a crush of need out there.
Yeah.
But I do have some suggestions for some quasi therapy that would be genuinely free
Okay.
to everybody. And that would be number one, if you go to my website, there's countless Psychology Today links to different articles. And I try to deliver the straight truth to everybody, men and women. And also, there's a podcast that I have called Managing Love Intelligently. That there's a link for that on my website, and that's about an hour of my being interviewed by a younger man. He's 40, and he has been asking me every single question I think any guy in this situation might ask me. So it's not tailor-made for the individual,
Right.
but it's sort of a general, suggestion. And most of it's offered from a place of genuine humility because I have yet to meet a client who's made a mistake I have not made.
Yeah. I
I,
hear
I
that.
have I have made every freaking mistake there is to make and then some. So I think those resources would be super helpful. And I there are other resources on that website, stevening.com, but I'll let people kind of discover them. There's also a YouTube channel. There's a lot of stuff. There's more Stevening than anybody should ever be exposed to.
Well, excellent. I will definitely check it out myself and hope the guys do as well. Thank you so much for doing this, Stephen. I really, really appreciate it.
Hey, Michael, it was a real pleasure. I love talking to you, and I think your work is really an important and noble one. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.